author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Political winds blow both fair and foul, and it's often timing that determines success or failure. Just one of the themes on today's action-packed edition. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we're examining Kevin McCarthy's hopes for the speakership, Sam Bankman-Fried's Democrat donations, and a whole lot more. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Hastings, Michigan on WBCH 1220 AM and 93.1 FM. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. As current Minority House Leader Kevin McCarthy attempts to seize the Speaker top spot, a razor-thin majority and some significant holdouts could imperil his hopes and dreams of becoming Nancy Pelosi 2.0. Now, we're joined by longtime host of this here Liberty Nation radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, to see if the pathway still holds for McCarthy and what pitfalls lie ahead. Thanks for coming in, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So tell me, is Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, is it a done deal or not?
It's not a done deal yet, although the alternative seems to be unspeakable because there's no viable opponent for him to run for Speaker within the Republican caucus. So he's going to have to satisfy the demands of the most conservative members of the House in order to get their votes, which he needs. He needs 218, and he's only got 221 members who can vote. So, it seemed, if there was one thing that seemed clear, Mark, about the election ahead of time, was that if the Republicans won the House, Kevin McCarthy would certainly be Speaker. And even that certainty is not inevitable now because he is being blamed for the midterm. Well, some are calling it a meltdown, but at least the disappointment of winning a mere 9 seats when he was supposed to win 20 to 30. He's being blamed for that. There's questions about his leadership. There's questions about his ability to herd the cats. Like Nancy Pelosi has. Nancy Pelosi, give her credit for knowing how to twist arms. McCarthy has never demonstrated that skill. So there's a lot of enduring questions about Kevin McCarthy.
Well, let's discuss those holdouts within the Republican Party, the Republicans who are standing in Kevin McCarthy's way. Obviously, they're proposing, I believe, or they're supporting, there's 4 or 5 of them, they're supporting Representative Andy Biggs, I believe, but they're asking for certain concessions in order to support McCarthy. And what are those concessions? What leverage do they want to apply?
Well, probably the primary demand which McCarthy should be able to meet is more members of the Freedom Caucus on the House Rules Committee, because that's a very powerful committee, of course. Now, there's 41 people in the Freedom Caucus, and, that represents a good 20% of the entire Republican caucus. They've also they want more of their members on there. They also want, something that seems to be entirely reasonable, 72 hours to read the text of a bill before they're forced to vote on it.
I wanted to delve into this particular one, Tim, because I read that in your recent article on LibertyNation.com, which the sponsor of this show, which details the trials and tribulations of Kevin McCarthy, and 72 hours to read a bill. As you say, that is not unreasonable, especially seeing as some of these bills are hundreds, if not thousands of pages long.
It should be longer than 72 hours. I think the reason leadership doesn't want it to be any longer is because the more someone reads and the longer they take, the more objections mount, and that makes it difficult for the leader.
I mean, another way to look at that, Tim, is the more you read, the more you know. And it's entirely possible to, I mean, we've seen it, haven't we? Stuffing pork into all these bills. If people don't get to read the bills, then you can stuff in what you want.
It used to be shocking to people that Nancy Pelosi would say about Obamacare, we have to pass the bill to find out what's in the bill. That was shocking at first. Now it's become, a fact of life. Everybody
it's still a shocking fact
members of Congress don't read the legislation that they're expected to vote on. I mean, how many times do you sign a contract that you don't know what's in it? Well, frankly, all of us do. Terms and conditions of every kind of purchase that we make or online service. The difference is this stuff goes into the law of the land. And there needs to be, look, the process was never designed to be expeditious. It was designed to be deliberate.
Yeah.
It was designed to have major changes in the structure of the country, the government, happen slowly and deliberately with great consensus. I think the bottom line is that essentially the Freedom Caucus wants to run the Republican caucus, and they have the numbers to do it. There's 41 members in that caucus, and they hold tremendous weight with a teetering figure like Kevin McCarthy, who's working with a tiny majority. And they know. And of course, it's good politics to use your leverage when you have it. If the Republicans had won, say, 25, 30 seats, McCarthy would be in a much stronger position to dictate the terms of his speakership. But under current circumstances, when he's largely blamed with his commitment to America that fell flat, with the fact that only 9 seats were flipped, he's not in a position of strength.
Isn't there a small but significant risk that Democrats could seize the speakership?
I think most people are not aware of the fact that to be Speaker of the House, you don't have to be a member of the majority party. You don't even have to be a member of Congress. I mean, they could pick you to be Speaker of the House, Mark.
And here begins my campaign, Tim Donner.
But they could make me or anybody the Speaker of the House because the Constitution specifies that the House will elect its leaders.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say it has to be from the majority and has to be from the lower chamber or the upper chamber or anything else. So, of course, the Democrats are enjoying this greatly, this cleavage that is developing in the Republican Party. So they've gone as far as to say, hey, we would vote for Liz Cheney if you want to bring her forward, because that really gets in the craw of Republicans. Now, the problem is, though, they can joke about that, but if they can't get 218 votes for McCarthy, then the Democrats, by necessity, get involved in the selection of the Speaker, because it's the Speaker of the entire House, not just the majority party. So everybody gets to vote. Ordinarily, both parties present a candidate, and the one from the majority party almost always wins. In this case, they'll throw out the rules because Democrats are going to exploit perhaps the most vulnerable speaker of this century, I think, because he doesn't have the policy bona fides of a guy like Paul Ryan, nor the arm-twisting skills of Nancy Pelosi, nor a definable ideology that sort of attracts support strictly for his beliefs.
So anybody's game to go. Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us. And we'll be back with Tim Donner right after this short break, talking good news for the Senate GOP in 2024. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The 2022 midterms are behind us, and it was far from the sweeping victory that Republicans had counted upon. However, things may not be so bleak for the Senate GOP when 2024 rolls around. Now, we're back with Liberty Nation senior political analyst Tim Donner, figuring out how the odds might just be in the Republicans' favor. Tim, how many Senate seats are up in 2024, and how many is the split between the parties?
Well, in any given federal election year, a third of the Senate is up 33 seats.
34, yeah.
Exactly, 33 or 34. And then there's some special elections thrown in, but it's essentially a third of the Senate. And of course, you're a slave to whatever the circumstances happen to be in that year and how they've changed from 6 years before when those same seats were up and 2 years before when the environment might have changed, which it has. But let me just put it starkly, Mark. If the Republicans cannot win the Senate in 2024, I don't know how they can ever win it, because of the 33 seats up in 2024. 23 of those are being defended by Democrats, 10 by Republicans. And among the Democratic seats that are up are 3 in deep red territory: Joe Manchin in West Virginia, John Tester in Montana. They're both moderates, but they're Democrats. And then there's a Sherrod Brown in Ohio, who's a dyed-in-the-wool liberal leftist in what has become Ohio, a very, very red state. Plus, on top of that, Mark, you've got 5 seats that are held by Democrats in battleground states that Joe Biden won by less than 3 points. In other words, they're pretty much toss-ups. On top of that, of the 10 Republican seats up, none of them are seriously vulnerable. So even with a 1-seat deficit going into the 2024 election, the Republicans should be able to garner at least a pickup of 3 or 4 seats. If they can, I think it would be a political malpractice.
Yeah, although we had similar discussions in the run-up to the 2022 midterms as well, and things that have a way of surprising you. Now, you say that they should be able to pick up 3 or 4 seats, and I think that's a very fair assessment. 3 to 4 seats, giving them the majority, just about. But it seems to me that America has really become used to very small, very slim majorities in the Senate.
Yes.
Now, is this really as new as it seems to me?
Well, it's just because of the circumstances that happen to fall on 2024 with these seats. I mean, for example, Arizona 6 years ago was clearly Republican. Now it's more purple. Michigan went red in 2016, but blue in 2020. Wisconsin Senate seat will be up, and you really have to call that a toss-up state. Joe Biden won it by a skinny 20,000 votes in 2020. So you've got, if the Republicans just win the 3 seats in deep red states, they'll have a 2-seat majority. And if they can pick off 1 or 2 of the 5 seats that are in narrow blue territory, or purple really, then they should have a bigger Senate majority than any time in, I think, 10 years. But of course, as you said, things change a lot in 2 years, but the numbers are overwhelmingly in favor of the GOP for the Senate in 2024.
So obviously, who will be on the presidential tickets for each party? I mean, I think that's one of the biggest questions in politics today. And it's a very much an unknown one. We can speculate till the cows come home, as we say here in the rural UK. But do you think that the final candidates, whomever they may be, will impact this inbuilt numbers advantage?
Certainly. If you have, for example, Donald Trump as the nominee, that presents one set of circumstances. If you have a Ron DeSantis or a Glenn Youngkin or a Tim Scott or a Mike Pompeo, all of whom have designs on running if not in 24, certainly in 28. Top of the ticket matters, yes, and that could make the difference in a couple of close Senate races in swing states. I think the big question about the presidential race at this point is not whether those guys that I just mentioned want to get in, but whether the fact that Donald Trump being in will scare them off because they know their brand is going to be significantly tarnished because Trump will decimate them in a primary, not necessarily at the ballot box, but certainly verbally. He will try to take them all down and discredit all of them. So they have to decide, for particularly DeSantis, whose star is clearly markedly on the rise. Does he want to cash in and exploit that while his star is way up high in the sky? Or does he fear his brand being diminished so badly by running against Trump that he's damaged for the future? That, to me, is the question.
Now, an ancillary to that would be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, surely we're looking at latest estimates suggest that there'll be 5 million plus illegal migrants crossing the border this coming year already for the fiscal year 2023, which has only been going just over 2 months at the time of recording. Started in October, there's been 500,000 illegal border crossings and no end in sight to that. And that's just one of a multitude of crises that are consuming this administration. Do you think that Biden and Harris on the ticket will have the same combustible impact that Donald Trump on the ticket on the other side would have?
No, because Joe Biden, for all that Republicans dislike or even revile him, he doesn't stir the kind of hatred that a Trump or an Obama or a Clinton or a Bush seem to engender. So he's just, the Democrats kind of are sorry that he's as addled as he is. The Republicans think he's just, a tool for the far left. But I can tell you this much right now, this midterm election has emboldened Joe Biden. He is interpreting it as basically a mandate for his continuing the type of leadership that he's had, which is, well to the left of center. So he looks like, barring medical circumstances, I now guess that he definitely will run in 2024. He will act as a statesman, stay home, and let the rest of the party go out and protect and defend him as he runs for re-election. I really believe that's going to happen now that A, Kamala Harris is not electable, and B, Gavin Newsom, the most realistic challenger, has said he's not going to run. Even he said he wouldn't run under any circumstances, though I suspect that would change if Biden changes his mind and says he's not going to run.
Continuing with our theme, circumstances always change. Tim Donner, thanks you ever so much for being with us.
Delight to be here, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
FTX founder Samuel Bankman-Fried has been arrested and detained in the Bahamas. He's facing a bevy of charges that some suggest rival the fallout from the Enron debacle. But what happened to all that cash, and will political recipients of his generous donations hand it back? Well, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, man about town, and host of the Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, to figure it all out. Welcome back, Scott.
And chief appreciator of the British pronunciation of Sam Bankman-Fried's name.
And how did I say it? Fried?
Fried, as in eggs, yes.
Oh, as in how it's spelled. Okay.
That's right. That's why I appreciate it. Absolutely.
Well, my guess would be that there is a UK television character on a show called Hyacinth Bucket. And she insists that her name is pronounced Bouquet. And so I'm suspecting that Mr. Bankman-Fried is doing precisely the same thing. So, Scott, what charges is SBF facing?
Well, he's in Bahamian custody now, pursuant to their treaty obligation to enforce a U.S. Arrest warrant. Basically, what happened was the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan went to a grand jury, got indictments, sealed indictments, and an arrest warrant. They sent it down to the Bahamas, pursuant to our treaty obligations. They arrested him, and he's in custody there. He's charged with at least half a dozen, I think certainly more than that, different types of fraud charges. Along with that, there's a money laundering charge and then a election campaign finance law violation charges as well.
Well, that was really the piece that stood out to me was about the political donations, because this was in the SEC filing as well, and that.
So, for people who don't know, the Securities and
bit,
Exchange Commission also filed civil charges against Mr. Bankman-Fried, hoping to recover, a lot of the money that he stole.
Okay, so here's the thing. I want to delve into a little bit about how this works. So, SBF, or Bankman-Fried, he took money into his company from various investors, and then he, without going too deep into the weeds, he swapped it between. I
think maybe I can do it a little bit quicker.
Sure, I want to get to a specific point, Scott.
Okay.
And so he swapped money between two companies, FTX and Alameda. But then he took large chunks of this money and he donated it to politicians. Yes or no?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
40 million in the most recent cycle that we're told.
Could you tell me that number again?
I think it's 40 million in the most recent cycle. Called the second largest donor to Democrats, so only behind George Soros. In the most recent cycle. Yep. In the cycle before that, he was the second largest donor, second only to Michael Bloomberg.
Oh, there you go. Wasn't Michael Bloomberg running in the last?
And also a major donor.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this money that he's donated, this is essentially people's savings or people's investment funds, individuals, and he's taken it and he's given it to politicians. Now, do you know the breakdown between which parties that these funds benefited? Because I'm reasonably sure that it was all to the left, right? Or majority to the left.
Not all, but certainly the lion's share. Better minds than I will break it down with specificity, but it's not close. And the Republicans he did give to are like Mitt Romney and Susan Collins. Like, they're not exactly the,
They're not Make America Great Again politicians.
No, definitely not.
That make Mormonism great again.
But there are enough Republicans to say that it was, it wasn't just one. There were a fair number of Republicans that he gave to as well. He's also claimed, by the way, without substantiation, to be the second largest donor to Republican election committees as well, but that he did so in a concealed fashion, which is, of course, itself illegal.
So these funds, Scott, that went out to politicians, are they under any legal obligation to return them from their campaign coffers or from their personal bank accounts?
Oh, well, they're definitely not from. They didn't personally accept anything, so they wouldn't be personally liable for returning anything. We're talking about campaign and campaign committees. And the answer is I don't think so. I can't say for sure yet, Mark. I'm still looking into some people who've written on this who are election law experts, and I have a kind of general expertise in some things, but not election law, which has its own sort of particular band of law. So, but initial, the initial wave seems to suggest that no, it's not. The U.S. attorney asked for voluntary, returns of these contributions, which it's a kind of a laugh line, but actually, a politician is definitely, susceptible to
they live and die
pressure.
by public approval, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we've seen some already return them, not generally to the trustee who's in charge of this. The company is in bankruptcy, the FTX exchange, which is where these customer funds were legally located. I mean, I know the money migrated to wherever he stole it to, but and that's where the proper place to return it to. We've seen a number of politicians who've written checks to various charities for amounts that mirror the amount they've gotten from SBF.
But that Scott, to me, that seems just a further kick in the face, right? To the people,
especially
who
if you're
lost their
sitting
money.
there. Can you imagine being one of those politicians' constituents having had a deposit at FTX that has been stolen, and that guy got some of the money, and instead of giving it back to the fund, he gives it to, Save the Trees, which of course buoys his. That's the other thing too. It's not just that he doesn't have the funds. They gave it in a way that buoys their own political life.
Let's be clear here. These are Democrat politicians for the most part. So
we have seen some Republicans give back. By the way, in defense of him, Beto O'Rourke kicked back a $1 million donation that SBF gave, and it was before the criminal charges were announced.
What did he know, and when did he know it?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Scott, I think a lot of people are annoyed at Bankman-Fried's, let's call it largesse, shall we? Because tens of millions of dollars.
It's not largesse, Mark. It's
I was using it in a somewhat sardonic tone there.
Sure.
Tens of millions of dollars. That impacts the outcome of elections. I mean, it must, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't be asking for donations for their campaign funds, right? So money impacts elections. Otherwise, no one would spend it. So you have people.
Money amplifies speech. That's the legal purpose it has for in elections.
So you have people who were elected, and they were elected through the amplification of their speech with fraudulent funds. How do you square that circle?
Well, there's a middle part there that you've inserted. I don't know that they would agree with. You said they've been elected because of the amplification of their speech. So what you're saying is that without that donation,
I'm saying that there's a possibility,
Mark,
that they may not have been elected without that.
The legal argument that you're making is what we would say is, but for that donation, they would not have been elected. And that's a taller tree to climb than just, hey, you shouldn't have taken that, or it would be great if stolen money wasn't donated to your campaign. I don't think we can say for any particular race at this time, without an SBF contribution, that they would not have been successful.
Of course, $10 million makes no difference in races that are decided by just a couple of thousand votes. Scott, you know that. I mean, let's not talk crazy here.
Say it to a legal standard, though, that it would implicate them in some sort of that's the bar that I think we have to keep these things set.
Sure, I agree, Scott.
High. Yeah.
So Scott, what's next for Mr. Bankman-Fried? Or Bankman-Fraud or Fried. I'm not sure which one to pronounce.
Bankman-Fraud is the best way to say it, I think. He is going to fight extradition to the United States, at least initially. It seems like he was denied bail, and he's a man with
if I may just
to
interject on that,
still.
Scott. If I may just interject on that, I believe one of the reasons he put up to the judge to facilitate him being allowed to be released on bail was that he was a vegan, right?
I saw that on some social media, but I didn't see it in hard reporting.
I saw that in proper.
I'll tell you the best story that came out of the bail hearing from Hard Reporting. This is from CoinDesk, who actually broke the story that sort of started the avalanche of this whole thing, which was that the judge said, "I've been thinking a lot about your whether to grant you bail. And I'll tell you, on an ordinary day, ask anyone. I don't take a drink, but boy, last night I took a drink." That was the judge in discussing his bail conditions. So, but he was held over until February. Now I assume that's just a placeholder for either, I think we'll probably see some extradition hearings before that, or maybe a waiver of his right to contest extradition. There's one kind of interesting feature of the extradition treaty that we have with the Bahamas, I learned about after his arrest, which was that the prosecution cannot charge SBF with other crimes after he is extradited if they want to. So in other words, they know what he did now, right? If they don't discover new facts that might justify new charges. So just on these facts, they can't pile on charges after they get him out of the Bahamas. That's part of the treaty. So they have to charge everything they want right up front, which is kind of
could that be to the benefit of Mr. Bankman-Fried?
Certainly.
Yeah, that certainly seems like it, right? So maybe
any flexibility that you take away from the prosecutor accrues to the benefit of the defense, I think.
I would be on the lookout for an acceptance of his deportation
maybe
back to the United States.
It's important to recall too that both of his parents are Stanford law professors, so presumably the top of the heap in terms of legal thinking, and we'll see what they
All
They
right,
had
Scott
that.
D. Cosenza, thank you ever so much. We'll be right back with Scott after this short break discussing whether Twitter violated the First Amendment. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Elon Musk and his infamous Twitter files have captivated the nation as the internal memos and messages detail what seems to be a bias against conservatives in general and President Trump in particular. Most notably, it appears that the company, under previous ownership, had regular meetings with federal officers. Now, did this violate the First Amendment clause of the Constitution? To figure that out, we're joined again by Mr. Scott D. Cosenza to figure out the legality, the constitutionality, and the likelihood of what happened here. Scott, I have one question for you. Did Twitter, under previous ownership, violate the First Amendment?
So instead of answering you yes or no, what I think I would suggest is that the question be posited thusly: did the government Twitter interaction violate the First Amendment rights of some people? And I think the answer to that question is yes. And the reason why I changed the question is Twitter is a private entity. I don't think they are charged with upholding the First Amendment. They don't have the power to.
They don't
First
have a
Amendment
responsibility to adhere to it, yeah.
Yeah, the First Amendment is a restriction on government action. The government will not violate the rights of the people in a certain manner. Now, did the government violate the rights of the people in colluding with social media to restrict their messages and dampen their speech? Well, it's a debatable point, but I think yes, it is the restriction. You know, if I'm free to speak, there's something called a solicitation of trespass in the law, which is kind of interesting, Mark. And in some places, this is a forbidden act. And what it means is you'll often see where these are kind of popular YouTube videos. Somebody's videotaping the police, and they're doing so from like a parking lot of a store. And the store owner hasn't complained about the person videotaping, but the cops don't want them there. So what they do is they go and they solicit from the store owner a trespass warning for the person, so they can then order them off the property. And that's not a proper use for the police, because they're then frustrating that person's First Amendment right.
Yes.
And if the police ask Twitter, I think, to stop allowing the speech of citizen A or B because of the messaging, that they don't like that messaging, well, that seems to be a clear violation of the tenets of the First Amendment, even though they're not the ones that are actually, flipping the switch to turn the account off or turn the mute button down on the, what do they call it, the reach, I guess, of the of the postings. So I hope that satisfies.
It is an interesting answer, Scott, and I'm glad that you rephrased the question to something a little more specific there, because if we look at what happened was, according to the Twitter files, and as of now, we have no reason to disbelieve that the messages posted within those Twitter files, reporting by Barry Weiss and Matt Taibbi, are fraudulent, or as the case with the Hunter Biden laptop, nobody has yet accused it of being Russian disinformation.
Oh, yeah, there's and Schellenberger too, and it's all it's all coming from the inside. So I'm saying the veracity is I mean, you don't say beyond question, but there's no credible claim that this is anything other than the goods here.
And so what you had was a number of government agencies approaching a private company, and as you point out, this invited trespass sort of thing, asking them to either shut down or limit the scope or the reach, basically de-amplifying the voice of certain people. And in some cases, those people got banned. And specifically, we're talking here, I think, about banning was President Donald Trump. Now, when he was banned, I believe it was January 8th, 2021, you had a number of world leaders, Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, and President Labrador of Mexico, all expressed their Manuel Obrador something of Mexico. I'm sorry, I do apologize, Mr. President, El Presidente. I have got your name wrong there. But they all expressed shock at the fact that he'd be removed from the platform. And of course, the messages seem to suggest that they could find no good cause for removing Donald Trump, and yet removed him anyway. Now, would Twitter, the people involved
Mark,
in that,
he was Donald Trump. I mean, I don't understand what you don't get about that. Orange,
but it's
man,
as they say,
bad.
show me the man and I'll show you the crime, right?
Yeah.
So
Because you're part of the problem.
this, I mean, I think everybody agrees this was a massive overreach. The internal documents show they didn't have cause to remove Donald Trump, correct?
Well, do you mean what the internal documents show is that according to their own rules, Donald Trump did not violate the rules in order to merit a suspension. If his name wasn't Donald Trump and he was president of wherever his stand, he would have
Let's
an
say,
active
for
Twitter
example,
account
he
today.
was president of Iran and he called for the eradication of the Jews in the Jewish state. Just for example, let's use that as an example.
Let's have some cultural understanding, Mark. You sound like a real
because of course
type.
that tweet wasn't removed, by the way, I might add, from the Ayatollah. That still stands, right?
What the people inside Twitter said were that Donald Trump's statements could lead someone to perhaps commit violence, and that therefore that was it's not even a fig leaf, it's a shadow of a ghost of a fig leaf that they were going to cover themselves with to justify the suspension of his account. And they had never before pulled somebody's account forever for anything, I think, short of an actual direct threat of violence. So that's the other thing, that it was an indefinite suspension. It went directly against Dorsey's commandment that suspension should have a fixed term.
And of course, directly after the Twitter ban came the Facebook bans, the YouTube shutdowns of people who were interviewing Donald Trump. And I think it created a roller coaster. It was the straw that broke the censorship camel's back and just allowed it all to collapse. So where does it go from here, Scott? Where do we go? Where does I mean, here's the thing, right? Who's to enforce this? Who's to figure out who's to blame and who's to hold the government to account in this situation if account is needed to be held? Who investigates it other than the people who were the ones who were going to Twitter and saying, hey, we think you should shut this guy down?
We know about it.
It's a mess.
And it's ultimately up to the people to enforce it against the politicians. If they, it's our job to report it and get the facts out and for people to look into it. And it's, the volume that we put behind it is because of the magnitude that we think the story has, the importance that it has. And people have to decide what to do with the information. But it's not like there's an attorney general that's going to come in and prosecute somebody for this.
I thought Merrick Garland was non-political.
Yeah.
You're telling me that he might not investigate.
He's working hard on it. Yeah.
He'll speak to his friends at Twitter and then decide whether to investigate, right?
Somehow, some way, I'm confident of all the charges that might be brought, those won't be included amongst them.
Scott, we will keep following this story, the Twitter files, the fallout from it, and any accountability that happens if it does. And you are right. It's all about regular people amplifying their voices and demanding answers to satisfy their needs and wishes. Scott D. Cosenza, thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Tim Donner and Scott D. Cosenza, for joining the show. And of course, thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. My parting shot this week is a simple quote from Thomas Paine, who said, "A body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody." And with all that's happening in government, social media, and indeed the world at large, that's good advice to live by. As Scott pointed out earlier in the show, real accountability rarely comes at the hand of the government or the corporation, who have their own vested interest in either obfuscating the facts or maintaining the status quo. It comes from you and I, all of us, the people. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.